Thanks, Paul, and thanks for having me. Hi, yes, I'm Alistair. I work at NHS Digital, as Paul just said. Was actually brought in to lead on open data about a year ago, but for the last 6 months, obviously been very much involved in our aspects of the COVID response. So what I was thinking of doing is talking through some of the work that we've been doing around our open data sets that we published and our dashboards at quite a working level, I guess, is where I've been involved. Share some of the stuff we've done, and I think we've done some good stuff, but also talk about maybe some of the lessons we've learned, some of the challenges we face, and I guess what we do next as well. And I think it'd be great if that's where the group can potentially help us to help everyone else. So I guess I'd start off with saying that I think probably 5 months ago, I did go back to our first open data release for COVID, which was the 111 triages where COVID was suspected, but we released in April. So since then, we've sort of been building out our open data offering in response to COVID, and I think I'm hoping we can then build this out to other areas within NHS Digital. So those that haven't seen it, I'm just going to share my screen, but we built kind of an open data dashboard data set hub, which you should be able to see now. So I'll drop the link in the chat after this, but this sort of gives an overview of data sets and that we brought together in dashboards to hopefully make it more consumable, and then everything that is in these dashboards, obviously publishing the open data sets behind the scenes as well, which will enable enable for people who want to go at the data and do whatever they need to do, to use that appropriately. So probably our most common, most popular dashboard is our progression dashboard, which gives sort of an overview of the progression of the virus by upper-tier local authority. So probably get 800 to 1,000 hits on a normal day to this, and then we'll get spikes depending what's going on in the news. So is that loading up now? And this just gives you some basic stats, what's been going on over the last 7 days. You can sort of do a play feature where each of these dots is a local authority and see how they move around over time. Look at some basic stats, and you can see, somewhat depressingly, both cases and triages are moving upwards. So I guess we've been quite a lot of effort in terms of getting this out, certainly initially. This was the first dashboard and the first open data set we published. So if you go down to the links here, you can drop down on our publication page, get the CSVs, put a lot of work into having permalinks, good metadata, so it's all indexed on Google. So people can get at the raw data as well, which I think is really, really important, as well as making it a bit more consumable where we think that's appropriate, and also completely open to other people doing that as well, and we potentially could bring that onto our dashboard hub. That's something I'm discussing internally at the moment. And over time we've built this out, so shielded patient lists, coronavirus triages, which I've just shown you, vaccine studies, so you can see people who are volunteering for vaccines. And interestingly, if you go onto that, Leeds does really well. See lots of altruistic people in Leeds volunteer for the trial, which is fantastic, especially when you adjust it by population. We more likely to volunteer than other areas. So you can see that little dot there. It's a little dark area of people who are volunteering, which is fantastic. And again, this is sort of show benefit and hopefully drive uptake of volunteering for trials for people who have tested for COVID and those that haven't. And then what we started to do is build out other sort of data sets and bring together potential dashboards around e-referrals and activities in hospitals, because obviously that's closely related to what's going on in COVID. We may have initially made that open data set to help commissioners for in example of hospitals, but it can also be used for general sort of MI and insight. So keen to get that out there more and more, and so that went out in the last few weeks. It's added to this hub, and we're building that out as things progress. We have got our sort of standard open data offering, our sort of 300 odd publications that are also you can link to from our main website. I think some of the challenges we sort of focused, is one, I think, to start off with, we had either open or closed. Those are the two parts of the data spectrum we had. I think now one of the nice things over the last few months is we've got a middle ground. We've got monitored. So we've got a Pillar 2 contained dashboard that worked very closely on over the last few months, and I've sort of owned that as a product owner. That I think is now reaching about 75% of local authorities are using that to look at Pillar 2 information, do some mapping, and see how the positive cases, as well as testing coverage and more triages spread over their local patch, and that goes all the way down to postcode now, which was in our last release. We're now continuing to sort of polish that in a number of ways, and we've also got a shielded patient list in that middle ground, and we've also got a cohort identification tool that's about to be released in the coming weeks to help research research studies identify cohorts that are most suitable for them and where they are in the country. So I think one of the nice things over the last couple of months is I feel like we're playing in that middle ground now. So we're playing on the spectrum. It's not either it's open or it's closed, and then otherwise you can't have it. We've now got a bit of a support wrap and a proper service wrap about letting data out that disseminating that in a much more easier fashion. And then my ambition is to get as much stuff in that middle zone into open as stuff settles down, as we get the legal basis sorted and all the rest of it. Because there are obviously a number of things we need to sort before we can get it into the open domain. So I think in terms of, I just touch on some of the lessons and complexities in terms of getting open data out there. So one of the, I think the key things is understanding the legal basis for everything we do. I think that's incredibly complicated, especially when COVID has been concerned, and we're covered by the COVID direction, which governs what we can and can't do. I think understanding, interpreting that, how to consult around all that in the early days was a massive learning curve. And I found quite frustrating because I felt I was having a lot of conversations and not doing anything. But I think that's something you have to go through. I think the other thing is sort of like certainly on a working level, with getting open data out there, getting dashboards out there that the public can access, is the sort of technical debt and internal complexity that you have to challenge. And I think that's been a big learning curve. Okay, so we've got a load of legacy systems, or just old systems that are still used. So 111 telephony is the one I often use. Quite a mature system, not really designed to go and get all the data out of the back end and shove it into something else to get it out onto out onto the internet so people can use it for all sorts of good purposes. We've had to build a lot of pipelines. They were all manual. We were all working shifts in nights, still do for some data feeds for COVID to manually extract stuff and get it out there. And we're only now starting to slowly automate it all. And it sounds easy, but it's actually incredibly complicated when you've got quite a lot of that kind of tech debt that we built up. And I think that's one big lesson that we've learned. I think the other sort of big technical lesson in terms of getting stuff out there is performance, and making sure that what you can get out there is scalable. And I think there's two bits to that: making sure it doesn't fall over and doesn't frustrate users. But then obviously, people are very concerned about reputational risk. What happens if your website goes over? What happens if your dashboard is switched off? And I think because there's so much focus on COVID, we're putting a lot of effort into hardening everything out, putting web throttling on, all this kind of good stuff. And again, I think I probably underestimated the complexity of that from a technical perspective. But it's taken a lot more effort and money to do to get that sort of hardening around everything that we do, and we're putting a lot of stuff new into the public domain. Hopefully mid-October we'll have addressed all the various issues around that. Obviously we addressed all the cybersecurity issues, much earlier on. But I think that again is kind of a lesson. If you want to get a lot of stuff out there and open, there's a lot of other sort of stuff on the periphery that you need to sort out in terms of making sure that you've got something that's properly scalable and resilient, and it isn't very, very, very flaky. And I think the other debt that we accumulated and still paying off, if I'm honest, is usability debt. So open data, you get it out there, you get it used, you try and get products out there that are open and are used. But do you really know all your users, how they're using it, and constantly getting those requirements back into the, into the center, which I guess is where I work. I've only been here a year, but I'm still getting my head around this. So I'm in the center. So, get stuff into the center, and we've got to try and respond to that. It's often hard to see what's going on out there. So I'm really interested in how we can make that more distributed and more efficient. But that has been a challenge. We'll get something out there for one use case, we'll use for something else, which is fantastic, but that gives us more requirements we've got to respond to, and you get this bottleneck, and I end up having to have lots of conversations around prioritization. So I think that usability debt, and then how we become more decentralized, is sort of a key thing I'm interested in. But I think on the plus side, I think there's lots of stuff that we have that we didn't have before. We've got lots of low infrastructure to get stuff out there in an open way, in a controlled way, as opposed to just that two ends of the data spectrum, which I think is really positive. And I think we're continuing to get good usage stats now in terms of people using our open data sets. That's obviously increased dramatically, as well as our dashboards. As I say, so we've got 1,000 people, probably 800 to 1,000 hitting progression on a normal day across everything. It's a bit more than that. In terms of our private stuff, we probably get about 2,500 views a week. And most of those are for the Pillar 2 contained dashboard, but SPL and permission to contact is coming up, which is really good. So that's it really, sort of what we're doing from Native Digital's perspective. I think main lessons learned, I think, is, if I had my time again, probably make some slightly different decisions about accumulating some of our solutions so we avoid technical debt, and means that we could do more with less. And I think, I think now the main challenge is probably hardening what we've got, and then this constant question of aligning everything across what seems like a very complex system. It's really interesting to listen to Tom, who understands this much better than me. I'm a very small bit player, but I think it's very understanding, what are we doing, what are PHE doing, what are TTC doing, what are DHSC doing. Got all these players, and it's very hard to sort of have a view across that piece to understand what is best to do, because you don't want to duplicate, but you don't want to not do anything. And I think that's a constant balance. I certainly feel like I'm trying to tread, in terms of what we can do that's most helpful for the wider system. So I think that's organizational complexity, I think, is something that we're probably still navigating, and that again can make it more complicated when I'm asking for funding, trying to get stuff out there, looking for a commission, which is all very dry subjects, but really is what enables us to do stuff, really, certainly in the center in NHS Digital. So that's it really.